I used to imagine this day so many times that it became a kind of warm prayer inside me. My son's wedding. The moment I would finally see him standing tall in a suit I helped him buy when he couldn't afford even the alterations. The moment I'd watch him make vows, build his own family, maybe even say a few words thanking the woman who raised him alone through double shifts, broken shoes, nights of cold leftovers, and all the small humiliations life throws at black women who work hard but earn just enough to stay afloat. I pictured myself in a beautiful seat near the front, smiling with tears in my eyes, feeling, just for once, that my sacrifices had turned into something gentle, something worth celebrating. But reality has a way of arriving like a slap you don't see coming. The ballroom doors opened, and for a second, I let myself believe my fantasy was real. Chandeliers glowed like warm honey. Soft jazz swirled around satin-covered chairs. Guests floated in, wearing colors that shimmered in the light. It smelled like roses and champagne, like a dream. Then the usher appeared, a young man barely 20, wearing a stiff white shirt and holding a tablet. "Name, please?" he asked. I gave it. "Congratulations, Mrs. Coleman," he said, but his eyes flicked down at the screen, confused, then back up at me. "I'm supposed to take you, right this way." He didn't lead me toward the center aisle. He didn't lead me toward the decorated tables where my sisters from church were seated. He didn't lead me toward the row the bride's family filled with matching corsages. No, he led me past all of it, past the marble pillars, past the floral arch, past the guest tables glowing with candlelight and gold-trimmed plates, past everything beautiful, until we reached a small round table tucked near the service area, so close I could smell dishwater and onions. The kitchen door swung open every few seconds, hitting the wall with a dull thud. Servers rushed out with trays, dodging the corner of my chair like it was nothing more than clutter in their way. "Here you are," the usher said quickly, clearly embarrassed. I stared at the table. The cloth was wrinkled, slightly damp, with a brown ring from a sweating pitcher someone had set down earlier. 2 mismatched chairs, one wobbling slightly. The centerpiece was a wilted bunch of filler flowers, nothing like the towering arrangements on the other tables. "This must be a mistake," I whispered. But deep down, something cold curled around my spine, a feeling I knew too well, a feeling I had tasted in doctors' offices, government lines, workplaces where people assumed I knew less than I did, a feeling of being pushed aside with a smile. Before I could ask again, I heard laughter, familiar laughter. It was my daughter-in-law. She stood across the room, surrounded by bridesmaids in pale gold dresses. Someone pointed toward me. She turned, looked directly at the table, my table, and then leaned toward her maid of honor with a smirk so small it could have been invisible. Except I saw it, and I understood. "That seat fits her," she murmured. Her, not his mother, not Mrs. Coleman, not Mom, the name she used whenever she needed babysitting or help with the bills. Her, as if I were a stray piece of furniture placed in the wrong corner. The sound around me changed. I no longer heard music or laughter, just the rush of the kitchen, the metallic clang of trays, and my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. I sat down slowly. My knees ached, not from age, but from disappointment sinking deep. I smoothed the damp tablecloth with shaking hands. A server pushed a cart behind me, brushing the back of my chair hard enough to jolt me forward. "Oh, sorry," he muttered, already moving on. I wanted to disappear into the floor. A couple from the groom's side glanced at me, then quickly looked away, whispering. I wasn't sure what hurt more, their pity or the fact that my own son hadn't come over to greet me yet. 10 years of sacrifices weighed on my chest like bricks. 10 years of overtime shifts. 10 years of giving up new shoes, new clothes, vacations, rest. 10 years of slipping envelopes into his hand when he struggled to make rent. 10 years of rocking his baby to sleep while he and his wife worked things out. 10 years of being the safe place he returned to until the day he didn't need me anymore. And now, this table. I tried to sit tall, tried to breathe evenly, tried not to let the shame settle in my bones, but it did. It always does. A chair scraped beside me. I looked up and froze, because the last person I ever expected to see at my son's wedding, the last person who should have been anywhere near me, slowly pulled the wobbly chair out and sat right next to me. Her perfume hit me first, then her voice, then the memory of every cruel word she had ever said to me. My son turned in our direction at that exact moment. His face, smiling seconds earlier, dropped, drained, went pale, like someone had pulled the blood straight out of him. And in that instant, I realized something. This table wasn't just about seating. It was about placing me somewhere small, somewhere low, somewhere forgettable. But the woman sitting beside me? Her presence meant something far bigger was about to unfold, something my son clearly never imagined I would see. When she sat beside me, this woman I had spent 20 years avoiding, the air around our tiny table shifted. It tightened, thickened. The kitchen door swung open again, sending a wave of steamy heat that stuck to the back of my neck. But it wasn't the kitchen that made me sweat. It was her, my late husband's sister, Denise. A woman who once told me, straight to my face, that I ruined her brother's life by getting pregnant young. A woman who refused to help when he got sick. A woman who disappeared during the hardest years of our marriage, only to show up after his funeral asking about insurance money. A woman who had never attended a single school, play, birthday, or graduation for my son. And now, somehow, she had a seat at my son's wedding, right next to me, at the worst table in the room. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. Denise smoothed her dress, crossed her legs, and smiled as if the question amused her. "Oh, honey," she said, tapping her long, manicured nails on the table. "Your son invited me. Front row family, you know." Her words stabbed deep, sharper than I expected. My stomach dropped. Front row family, the exact thing I was not. I looked across the ballroom again, scanning the tables arranged like perfect islands under the soft lights. I saw the bride's family sitting near the center, laughing, clinking glasses, being photographed. I saw my sisters from church, waving meekly from the far side. I saw my son chatting with the officiant, a nervous smile stretching across his face. But no seat for me, no special place, just this table, this forgotten corner caught between the kitchen door and the ice bucket station. Denise leaned in, lowering her voice. "You know, I thought they'd put me somewhere better, too. But then the coordinator said I'd be sitting with you, so I suppose this is where the less important guests go." She said it casually, like she wasn't twisting a knife. A waiter nearly collided with my chair again, muttering apologies. Someone dropped a tray in the kitchen. Metal clattered, echoing all the way to the dance floor. I could feel eyes drifting toward us, then darting away, the way people look at a car accident but don't want to admit it. Denise adjusted her pearl earring and sighed dramatically. "Well, at least we'll have quick access to the bread rolls." Her voice grated on my nerves. I wanted to get up. I wanted to walk out. But I stayed seated, my hands clenched together in my lap, nails digging into the soft flesh of my palms, because this was my son's wedding, my baby's wedding, the child I raised while his father lay sick, while Denise never visited once. And yet here she was, invited. And I was shoved aside like baggage. For a moment, the shame was so thick I could hardly breathe. The lights blurred. My throat tightened. I remembered the envelope of money I slipped into my son's hand last month when he said the catering went over budget. I remembered the nights I watched his daughter so he could attend premarital counseling. I remembered running to the bridal shop with his fiancée to fix a zipper emergency the morning of the fitting. But none of that mattered now. Not to them. Not enough to earn me a decent seat on his big day. Then I noticed something. My son kept glancing in my direction. Not in a loving way, not in a proud way, but with a tight, worried expression, like he was afraid I'd move, afraid I'd speak, afraid I'd draw attention. Denise leaned back, studying him. "Your boy doesn't look happy to see me," she said coolly. "Didn't he tell you I was coming?" "No," I answered truthfully. "He didn't." She snorted. "Figures. He was always embarrassed by family." The words struck like lightning, fast, bright, burning. Embarrassed? Of me? I swallowed hard. Maybe that was the truth. Maybe that's why my seat was here. Maybe that's why the coordinator didn't hesitate to tuck me away like a mistake. But then, something unexpected happened. My son started walking toward our table, slowly, cautiously, his face pale, his jaw tight, his hands shaking just enough for me to notice. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Denise. His eyes widened, almost in fear, or guilt, or both. Denise straightened her back as he approached, smoothing her dress again, adjusting her pearls, smiling too wide, too polished, too ready. "Oh, look," she whispered. "Here comes my favorite nephew." My son stopped at the edge of our table, swallowing hard, eyes darting between the two of us like he'd seen a ghost. "Mom," he started slowly, I didn't know they seated you together." He wasn't lying, I could tell, but he wasn't innocent either. He knew she was invited. He knew exactly why. He knew what it meant. He opened his mouth again, voice cracking slightly. "Aunt Denise." Denise lifted a finger. "Save it, sweetie. Today isn't about old drama. Today is about family." The word family, spoken by the woman who abandoned him, hit me like another punch. My son flinched. For a brief second, I saw a crack in his carefully built world, a flicker of regret, confusion, shame. Something was wrong. Wronger than the seating chart. Wronger than the embarrassment. Wronger than Denise being there at all. And when he finally gathered the courage to speak, his voice trembled. "We need to talk, Mom, after the ceremony." The kitchen door slammed again, and I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever conversation awaited after the ceremony was not going to be simple, or kind, or small. This table wasn't the humiliation. It was just the beginning. When my son walked away from our table, weaving through guests who had no idea what kind of storm was forming beneath the surface, I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot that had lived in my chest for decades, finally shifting. And that shift pulled me backward in time into the years that had shaped us both, the years no wedding coordinator or seating chart could ever erase. People see the finished product, successful young man, steady job, fancy suit, but they never see the scaffolding that held him up long enough to become that man. They never see the woman behind the curtain. They never see me. I raised that boy through years thick with struggle, through winters where the heater rattled, threatening to die on us, through nights when I'd pretend I wasn't hungry so he'd finish the last piece of chicken, through mornings when I'd hide the holes in my shoes by walking a little slower, keeping my feet pointed straight so no one would notice. Life wasn't kind to us, but I refused to let it swallow him. I remember working double shifts at the nursing home, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., then 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and still coming home to check his homework, iron his clothes, and pack his lunch for the morning. I'd stand at the stove at midnight stirring a pot of rice while half asleep because he needed to feel like nothing in the world was missing, even when everything felt like it was. When his father died, everything fell on me. Bills, decisions, grief so heavy it sat in my bones. Denise didn't show up, not for the hospital visits, not for the funeral arrangements, not for the nights when my son cried himself to sleep. She resurfaced 3 months later, asking where her brother's tools were. That's who she was, and that's who my son chose to sit with me. But I kept going. I always kept going. When he wanted to join the basketball team, I bought him shoes, $79.99 from Foot Locker, money I didn't have, but money he needed. When he sprained his ankle, I missed a full shift at work to take him to urgent care, lost you $112 that day, but kept him safe. Then came college applications. He was bright. He was driven. But scholarships didn't cover everything. I remember standing in the financial aid office, hearing numbers that made my stomach twist. Tuition, fees, housing. I couldn't let him see fear on my face, so I smiled at the woman behind the desk and signed the loan papers with a steady hand. "Whatever we need, we'll manage," I told him. I picked up weekend cleaning houses to help cover the gaps. 2 years in, when he wanted to drop out because he felt overwhelmed, I drove 4 hours to his dorm and sat on the floor with him, reminding him who he was, reminding him who we were. When he graduated, he hugged me so fiercely he nearly broke my ribs. "You're the reason I made it," he whispered. I held on to those words for years, through every disappointment, every forgotten birthday call, every holiday he spent with his wife's family instead of mine. I told myself, he remembers. He knows what I gave. But memories fade when people get comfortable, when they find new families, new priorities, new versions of themselves that don't require the old foundations. Still, I kept giving. When his first child was born, I moved into his apartment for 2 months, cooking, cleaning, rocking the baby at 3 a.m. while he and his wife slept. When they needed a down payment for their townhouse, I withdrew $8,000 from my retirement savings, telling myself it was an investment in the family, even though my account never recovered. When they couldn't afford daycare, I rearranged my schedule to babysit 3 days a week. And when this wedding planning started, a wedding he knew I couldn't afford to contribute to, he still asked. Not directly, of course. Never that. Just small comments. "The photographer is more expensive than we thought." The catering bill doubled. "We're still short a few thousand." I knew what he was really saying, so I handed him an envelope, just like I always had. Sometimes helping isn't beautiful. Sometimes it's just survival disguised as generosity. Over the years, I stitched him together, financially, emotionally, practically. I patched every hole life tore open for him. I taught him right from wrong, respect from disrespect, dignity from shame. Or so I thought. Sitting at that table near the service door, listening to the clatter of dishes and the crash of ice being poured into metal bins, I realized something painful. Maybe he learned the lessons. Maybe he even appreciated them. But he didn't think they applied to me anymore. I had become the background of his life. Reliable, invisible, expected. A foundation people walk on without ever looking down. And Denise, sitting beside me, smug, polished, ready to insert herself into a life she never helped build. Even she seemed to know it. That was the part that stung the most, not the table, not the noise, not the humiliation, but the fact that someone who once abandoned him was given more dignity than the woman who raised him. As the ceremony music began and the ballroom lights dimmed, I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the weight of all those years settle like a stone. This wasn't just a seating mistake. This was a message delivered quietly, politely, under chandeliers and linen napkins. You are no longer important. But they had forgotten one thing. Women like me, Black mothers who have carried generations on our backs, we don't break easily, and that day something inside me began to rise, slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. The beginning of a change that neither my son nor his wife was prepared for. The ceremony passed in a blur, vows, rings, applause, but none of it reached me. I clapped when everyone clapped, stood when everyone stood, smiled when the photographer panned across the room. But inside, I felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out my ribs and left nothing but a trembling echo inside. When the bride and groom walked down the aisle, everyone rose to their feet. I rose too, but a server pushing a metal cart brushed my elbow so hard I stumbled. No one noticed, or if they did, they pretended not to. After the first dance, I slipped out quietly. No goodbyes, no hugs, no "thank you for everything." I walked through the parking lot, heels clicking against the pavement, each step sounding lonely, like tapping on an empty room. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had drained out of me, leaving only exhaustion. I kicked off my shoes and stood in the doorway of my small living room. Brown sofa, thrift store coffee table, baby photos of my son on the wall. Everything looked smaller than usual, dimmer somehow, as if the house itself had absorbed my sadness. I sank into the couch and covered my face with both hands. That was the moment I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a small leak in a dam that had held for too many years. I cried the kind of tears that have no sound, tears that had been waiting in the shadows of my heart for years, maybe even decades. Tears for every sacrifice forgotten, tears for every time I made myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I must have sat there for an hour, maybe more. The house grew darker as the sun went down, but I didn't turn on the lights. I felt safer in the dark, less exposed, less visible, less required to pretend everything was fine. Then my eyes drifted to the old box on the bookshelf. A dusty, floral patterned box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were mementos I had kept from my son's childhood, his elementary report cards, his first drawing of our family, crooked but sweet, his father's last letter before he died, a few cards from holidays when my son still remembered to write them. I reached for the box and placed it in my lap. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was a tiny pair of blue baby socks, the ones he wore home from the hospital. I held them gently, turning them over in my hands, remembering the weight of his newborn body against my chest, the warmth of him, the promise of him. Back then, I believed motherhood was a straight line. Give love, receive love. But life had taught me that some lines bend, twist, even snap. As I looked through the box, 1,000 memories rushed in. I remembered the night he came home at 16, trembling after being pulled over for driving while black. I stayed up with him until dawn, explaining the world gently but honestly, teaching him survival the way mothers like me have taught for generations. I remembered sewing his prom vest myself because the rental shop didn't have his size. I remembered watching him through the window as he boarded his bus for college, wiping my tears so he wouldn't see. Memory after memory washed over me like waves, each stronger than the last. And then, finally, it hit me. The wedding seat wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal happened slowly, over months, maybe years, through little shifts I ignored. The whispered decisions were made without me. The birthdays spent elsewhere. The tone his wife used when she mentioned the family, meaning only her side. The times he said he was busy when I needed a ride to the doctor. The holidays, when I cooked for 3 days, but they only stayed for 15 minutes. The humiliation at the wedding was simply the moment my heart finally noticed everything my mind had been trying to excuse. I set the baby socks aside and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. In a whisper, I asked the question that had been waiting patiently inside me. When did I become optional? The silence answered. It wrapped itself around me like a blanket of truth I didn't want but couldn't reject. I wiped my eyes, stood slowly, and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the light and faced the mirror. The woman looking back at me was older. Yes, hair streaked with silver, skin soft with years, but she was still strong, still standing, still whole. But her eyes, they were tired of being the backbone, the safety net, the wallet, the caretaker, the afterthought. I whispered to her, "You can stop now." Something shifted in my chest again, this time not loosening but tightening with purpose. Because beneath all the heartbreak, all the exhaustion, all the loneliness, there was a spark I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not revenge, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes at the bottom, The kind that rises when you finally hit a point where staying the same hurts more than changing. And that night, sitting alone in my quiet living room, surrounded by the relics of a life I had built from scratch, I realized something simple, something powerful. I wasn't done. I wasn't weak, and I wasn't finished being disrespected. Tomorrow would be different, because tomorrow I would choose myself. Morning light crept into my living room like a quiet visitor, slipping under the blinds and laying itself across the floorboards. I hadn't slept much, maybe an hour, but for the first time in a long time, the exhaustion didn't feel heavy. It felt clean, like something had finally burned off during the night. I moved slowly, letting my joints loosen with each step. I fixed a cup of tea, chamomile, the kind I drink when I need my mind steady, and sat by the small kitchen window. Outside, the world was going about its business, buses grumbling down the street, children with heavy backpacks shuffling toward school, neighbors warming up their cars for work. Life didn't pause for my heartbreak, and maybe that was a blessing. As the steam curled above my cup, I felt that spark again, the one I'd felt last night, the one that told me something inside had shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, silent, but strong enough to hold on to. I set my tea down and reached for the notebook where I keep all my bills and bank slips. A beat-up blue notebook with the corners bent and half the pages filled with numbers that had kept my son's life afloat for years. When I flipped it open, the truth stared me in the face. 212 month. Groceries for them when money was tight. $480 month daycare days I covered by babysitting so they didn't have to pay the sitter. $3,000, the time the car broke down and he just needed a little help. $8,000, the down payment for their townhouse. $500 here, $300 there. Years and years of small rescues. Rows of numbers all written by my own hand, all carved out of my own life. And none of it, not a dime, had earned me a seat anywhere but next to the service door. I closed the notebook. Not in anger, in certainty. I got dressed. Comfortable shoes, clean cardigan, simple earrings, and headed out. The morning air was crisp enough to clear my thoughts even more. When I reached the bus stop, I almost laughed at the memory of all the times I waited there during double shifts, praying the bus wasn't late so my son wouldn't be alone too long. Now I took that same bus in silence, letting the familiar roads pass by as I planned exactly what I needed to do. It was time to take myself back, piece by piece. The first stop was the bank. The doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and the cold air inside hit my skin like a small wake-up slap. I walked to the teller, a young woman with neat braids and kind eyes. Her name tag read Alicia. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" she asked. I placed my ID on the counter. "I need to make some changes to my accounts." We went through everything one by one. I removed my son's access to my online banking, something I had given him years ago in case of emergency. I canceled the automatic transfers that sent money to their joint account twice a month. I transferred my savings into an account only I could touch. I updated all my passwords. Alicia even helped me set up two-factor authentication so no one could log in without me. When she finished entering everything, she looked up and smiled. "All set. Anything else you need?" I hesitated, then shook my head. But as I walked back toward the exit, I stopped. There was something else. "I'd like to open one more account," I said softly, "for personal goals." Alicia brightened. "Of course. What's the saving goal? Travel, emergency, something fun?" Something fun. I hadn't heard those words applied to my life in years. I smiled. Something for myself. "Beautiful choice," Alicia said, typing quickly. When the papers were done, she slid them across the counter. "Congratulations. This account is all yours. All mine." The words felt like sunlight. Next, I stopped by the phone store. I bought a brand new phone, not expensive, just reliable, and set it up with a new number, a private number. One of my sons and his wife didn't know, one of their late-night urgent needs, money questions or "we're in trouble again" texts couldn't reach. Before I left, I had the clerk help me move only the contacts I still wanted. My sisters are from church. My cousin is in Georgia. Mrs. Johnson, my doctor, my job. That was it. Everyone else, including my son and daughter-in-law, would reach me only on my terms. Not automatically, not constantly, not at all hours, like my life was a call button they could press whenever they wanted something. It felt like someone had taken a heavy coat off my shoulders. On the walk home, I bought myself lunch from the tiny Jamaican spot on the corner. I ate slowly, savoring every bite of jerk chicken and rice like it was a small declaration. I matter too. When I finally returned home, the sun had shifted high into the sky, lighting up my living room. I set my new phone down on the table, opened the curtains wide, and let the light spill across everything. Then I whispered to the empty room, "This is step one." No yelling, no confrontation, no bitterness, just a boundary, a clear, strong, undeniable boundary. And though my son and his wife didn't know it yet, their world had just changed. Because for the first time in years, the supply they relied on without gratitude had been quietly, firmly, and absolutely cut. The silence lasted exactly one day. I woke the next morning feeling lighter, almost foreign in my own skin, as if I'd been carrying a backpack full of stones for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to walk without pain. I made breakfast, watered the plants, and even hummed a little while washing dishes. Then my old phone, still on the kitchen counter because I hadn't thrown it away yet, began to vibrate. Once, twice, 5 times in a row, call after call after call, his name lighting up the screen, my son. I didn't answer. A minute passed. Then the text messages came, one after another, like bullets tapping against glass. "Mom, can you call me? Something's wrong with the bank." "Mom, are you okay? Your transfer didn't come through." "Mom, I think there's an issue with your online account. Call me ASAP." "Mom?" Each message grew shorter, sharper. I set the phone face down. The old me, the one who lived in fear of disappointing him, would have panicked, grabbed the phone, apologized, even without knowing what for. But the woman who sat at the service table at his wedding the day before, she had changed. The calls kept coming. Finally, around 10:30 a.m., the tone shifted. A new message. "Mom, Charlotte is freaking out. Rent is due today." Charlotte. The daughter-in-law who looked at me like a burden, who seated me near the kitchen like clutter. I almost smiled. For years, they treated my help like a guarantee. Not a gift, not generosity. A guarantee. But guarantees have terms, and mine had expired. I walked away from the buzzing phone and swept the living room floor, humming. Within seconds, the buzzing started again. Charlotte this time. Her first message was polite enough. "Hi, Mom, hope you're doing okay today, just checking in." I didn't respond. 2 minutes later. "By the way, I think your bank app is having issues. The transfer we usually get on the first didn't show." 3 minutes later, "Rent is overdue. I'm sure it's just an oversight. Please send soon." 5 minutes later, "Mom?" Then the politeness cracked like thin ice. "Are you ignoring us? You know we count on that money. This is really stressful for us. Honestly, it's kind of irresponsible." I stopped reading. It's always the same script. They take, they expect, they demand, and when you stop giving, suddenly you are the villain. I put the phone in a drawer and let it keep vibrating in the dark. Around noon, the knocking started. Sharp, fast, impatient. I peeked through the curtains. My son, standing on my porch, pacing, running a hand over his hair like he did when he was nervous. He rang the doorbell twice, leaned close to the door as if he could hear my breath through the wood. "Mom, you home?" My heart tightened, not because I was afraid, but because I saw something in him I hadn't seen in years. Need. Except this wasn't the need of a child seeking comfort. This was the need of a grown man who had built his life on my labor, my money, my time. and was now watching it crumble. He knocked again, harder. "Mom, can you open the door? Something is wrong with your accounts." "Something is wrong?" "Yes. Wrong for him, but right for me." I didn't respond. He stepped back, pulled out his phone, and called. A second later, I heard the muffled vibration in the kitchen drawer. He tilted his head, listening. "Mom, I hear your phone. Why aren't you answering?" Because answering meant stepping back into the cycle. Because answering meant letting the guilt in. Because answering meant giving again. And I was done giving. He tried again, knocking so hard the door rattled. Then the shift happened, the one I knew would come. His voice lowered, confused, frustrated. "Mom, we need that rent money. We're short this month, you know that." We. As if I were part of their financial marriage. As if my retirement savings were their joint account. As if being his mother meant being his safety net forever. I stepped away from the door. Eventually, I heard footsteps retreat down the porch. I thought he'd left. But instead, he called someone. Charlotte. His voice carried across the porch in a sharp whisper. "I told you this was a bad idea to depend on her." "No, she's not answering." "Yes, I'm outside." "I don't know what her problem is. Maybe she's upset about the wedding or whatever." "I'm telling you, she's being dramatic." Dramatic? The word stung more than it should have. After everything I had done, every sacrifice, every quiet rescue, the moment I set a boundary, I became dramatic. Finally, after a long pause, he sighed loudly. "Fine. I'll talk to her later." His footsteps descended the porch stairs slowly, heavily, like the weight of their lives was finally settling in his shoes instead of mine. The car engine started, then faded away. Silence returned, but it wasn't the scared, lonely silence of last night. It was a powerful silence, a silence I owned, a silence that marked the first day in years that their emergency didn't become my responsibility. And the more I sat in that silence, the clearer it became. They weren't panicking because they cared about me. They were panicking because their access to me had changed. For the first time since he became a man, my son was meeting a version of me he didn't recognize. A mother with boundaries, a mother who wasn't a bank, a mother who was done explaining why respect mattered. And deep down, I knew. This was only the beginning of their unraveling. By mid-afternoon, the buzzing of my old phone had stopped, at least for a moment, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. I paced my living room, tracing circles on the wooden floor with my heels, replaying the morning over and over. Every text, every knock, every failed attempt to draw me back into their world of expectation. It had been a test, and I had passed the first step simply by staying quiet. But staying quiet wasn't enough. I needed allies, people who could see clearly what I was doing and why, people who could help me navigate this storm without turning it into another series of your dramatic mom moments. The first call went to Mrs. Johnson, my old friend from church. She answered on the third ring, her voice like a warm blanket on a cold morning. "Angela," she asked, "are you all right? I heard something at the wedding." I swallowed hard. My voice came out low, steady. "I'm fine, but I need advice. I'm done being treated like a convenience. Can we meet?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course. I'll come over this afternoon." Next, I contacted Carlos, a lawyer I'd met years ago while handling my husband's estate. He was sharp, practical, and had a quiet air that made complicated legal issues seem like nothing. I explained, in measured sentences, everything. The seating, the calls, the threats disguised as requests. "I need to make sure my accounts are secure," I said. "And if necessary, I want them to know they cannot just access me, my money, or my time without permission." Carlos paused. Then he said simply, "Good. That's exactly what you need. You have leverage here. It's time to organize your evidence." That evening, I spread everything on my dining table. Notebooks, receipts, bank statements, screenshots of messages, the envelope I'd given my son during wedding planning, photographs of the service table, and even a video I had taken secretly of Denise whispering to the bridesmaid that this seat fits her. The collection looked overwhelming to anyone else, but to me it was clarity, a roadmap of everything I had done for this family and how little recognition I had ever received. I made a list, every dollar transferred or gifted, dates and times of childcare or housing help, records of emotional labor, doctor visits, counseling, and advice given, evidence of humiliation at the wedding, seat placement, facial expressions, whispering caught on video. Each item I noted with precision, almost mechanically. The more precise I was, the more in control I felt. Next came the language. I rehearsed sentences in front of the mirror, short, direct, legal, but human. I only assist in my terms. This account is not available for transfer without my consent. Disrespect is unacceptable, regardless of familial connection. I repeated these aloud until the words felt natural, like breathing. Then I rehearsed for conversations that might occur in person. I imagined my son standing there, looking worried and desperate. I imagined Charlotte trying to guilt me. I imagined Denise smirking. I practiced responding calmly, firmly, without guilt. I understand your concern, but this is my decision. No, I cannot provide that. Yes, I have proof of every arrangement we've made. It's all documented. By the time Mrs. Johnson arrived, the house smelled of fresh tea and baked bread. Her eyes widened when she saw the array of documents spread across my table. "Angela," she said softly, "this is impressive. You've documented everything." I nodded. I have to. I can't rely on memories anymore. They twist, they argue, they pretend nothing happened, but paper doesn't lie. She sat beside me. "So what's next?" I met her gaze. "We make them accountable. Quietly. Professionally. But they will know I'm serious." That night, I sat alone after she left. I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Not relief, not victory. Clarity. Power. Ownership of my life. I realized the first step wasn't confrontation. It was preparation, documentation, allies, language, strategy. And tomorrow I would begin to assert it. No yelling, no tears, no begging, just precise, undeniable action. For the first time in a long time, I felt that spark growing, steady, unshakable. And I knew. When I finally acted, they wouldn't know what hit them. Because I was no longer a passive mother. I was a force they had underestimated, and that underestimation would be their mistake. The next morning, the storm arrived fully formed. It started with a knock at my door that sounded more like a warning than a greeting. I opened it to find my son standing there, face pale, mouth tight. Behind him, leaning casually, smugly, was Denise, his aunt holding a stack of papers like a shield and a sword combined. "Morning, Mom," she said, her voice sweet and deliberate, like sugar laced with poison. "We need to go over some paperwork." I tilted my head. "Oh? Which paperwork?" Her smile didn't falter. "The financial oversight forms. We need your signature so everything is smooth for the family. It's routine, nothing to worry about." I stepped aside to let them in, calmly, slowly. But inside, I was counting every breath, every gesture, every subtle threat wrapped in polite words. She handed me the forms. I skimmed them. Authority, control, restriction. Everything I had just fought to reclaim, condensed into 3 pieces of paper with legal jargon designed to intimidate. "This is unnecessary," I said evenly. "I don't need oversight, and I will not sign." Denise raised an eyebrow. "Mom, we're just trying to help you stay organized." Her words were hollow, rehearsed, perfumed with deceit. I folded the papers carefully as if handling delicate glass. "I'm organized, thank you. But I handle my own affairs." My son cleared his throat. "Mom, maybe it's easier if—" "Easier?" I interrupted. "Easier for whom?" I could see the tension flicker across his face. He hadn't anticipated my reaction, not this level of calm, not this clarity. Denise's smile tightened. We just want what's best. For you, for everyone. I leaned back, my eyes meeting hers. Best for me now is to not be treated like a child or a bank account. That is what I need. She pursed her lips, glanced at my son. He shifted uneasily. Their combined force, years of shaping the narrative, rewriting reality, controlling finances, was meant to overwhelm me. It didn't. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out my blue notebook, the one with every transaction, every babysitting shift, every loan, every forgotten thank you or birthday card I'd ever given. I placed it on the table. Everything here, I said, is documented. Every time I've helped, every sacrifice I've made. And yet, yesterday, at my own son's wedding, I was placed near the service doors. That is the reality. You don't get to erase it. Denise's eyes narrowed. Mom, don't... I raised a hand. I'm not finished. I opened the notebook carefully, letting the pages fall where she could see. $8,000 for the townhouse down payment. $480 a month for daycare covered. $212 a month groceries I provided. 20 documented visits to doctors, therapists, and appointments that ensured your life was smooth. Her hand twitched toward the papers in her hand. That's irrelevant. I closed the notebook. Irrelevant? Really? You called me dramatic this morning. You called me selfish. Yet here is proof of decades spent supporting you. If that's irrelevant, then your definitions are meaningless. My son swallowed. He tried to speak. I waited. Then Denise's voice sharpened. You're being unreasonable. If you don't sign, we may need to involve legal authorities to ensure you're capable of handling your finances. I tilted my head, letting her words sink in. She was threatening me now, directly, using the system she thought I couldn't navigate. I took a deep breath, slow, steady, the kind of breath that fills your lungs and clears your mind. Do what you must, I said calmly. But I have my lawyer, my records, and my witnesses. I am fully capable of managing my own affairs. Any attempt to override that will be contested, legally, publicly, and ethically. Denise blinked. My son looked stricken. The air in the room shifted. Their confidence, built over years of subtle manipulation, began to crack. You see, I continued, my voice soft but firm, I am not angry. I am prepared. You may think you control the narrative. You may believe that fear and insistence will make me comply. But the truth is documented. The truth is visible, and I have allies. I gestured toward the stack of papers. Every call, every transfer, every note, every receipt meticulously cataloged. Denise stepped back, finally realizing the scale of what she had underestimated. My son's jaw tightened. His earlier frustration faltered into silent acknowledgement. Mom, he began. No, I said gently but decisively. Not yet. Today you understand the rules. Tomorrow we discuss what comes next. I walked to the door, opened it wide, letting the sunlight spill into the room. You may attempt to control me, I said, but the control has shifted. I hold the evidence, the allies, and the authority now. This is no longer your game. I closed the door behind me, and in the quiet aftermath, I felt the first taste of victory. Not complete, not public, but undeniably real. They had thrown the first wave. I had stood firm, and the game was only beginning. The quiet after Denise and my son left that morning was a rare gift, and I used it with precision. I cleared the dining table of the previous day's documents and began anew. Not chaotic piles this time, but a system. Folders labeled clearly, each receipt, each screenshot, each note filed by date, by type, by significance. I found myself smiling as I worked. There was power in organization, a serenity I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer reacting. I was planning. First, the financial records. I listed every transaction, my contributions, transfers, childcare payments, grocery runs, and repairs I covered. each one cross-referenced with bank statements. Then came the correspondence. Text messages, emails, and even the voicemail I had saved from the wedding day, when Denise whispered, "This seat fits her." I printed everything in duplicates, one set for my lawyer, one for me. Physical evidence that couldn't be ignored. Next, the visual records. Photographs of the service table placement, angles showing the proximity to the kitchen, the uneven chairs, the folded napkins stained by careless servers. Each image framed the story clearly. How I had been placed deliberately out of sight, diminished, relegated to the margins. Then came personal testimonies. I contacted Mrs. Johnson, my church friends, and neighbors who had witnessed small incidents over the years. The times my son was handed money he hadn't earned, the nights I stayed up with his sick child, the subtle exclusions that went unnoticed by others. Each agreed to write short statements, confirming the history, confirming the pattern. I called Carlos, my lawyer, and we reviewed the evidence together. He suggested adding contextual statements, explaining the nature of elder financial abuse, subtle emotional manipulation, and family-based exploitation. "It's not just a seating issue," he said. "It's the culmination of a long pattern, and the law recognizes patterns. You have leverage." Satisfied, I turned my attention outward. If the law was one layer of protection, community support was another. I reached out to my local women's support group, a small network of women over 60 who shared similar stories of being taken for granted by children or family members. "I don't want to be the only voice," I told them. "I want to make this about more than me, about accountability." They responded with empathy and strategy. One suggested documenting public testimonies to educate others. Another offered to connect me with a retired judge who could provide a perspective on elder rights. Their encouragement reinforced what I already felt. I was not alone, and my story mattered. I spent the afternoon cataloging everything meticulously. Each folder had date of transaction, amount, purpose, witnesses. Supporting images or notes, I added a small notebook for observations. Daily notes of phone calls, unusual requests, or attempts at manipulation. Every minor detail might be crucial later. Every small act could be evidence of a pattern. By evening, my living room looked like a small command center. Blue folders stacked neatly, yellow tabs marking key points, a printed timeline across the table tracing events from birthdays, holidays, school enrollments, and yes, the wedding day humiliation. I stepped back and looked at it all, a map of decades-long devotion meticulously documented, but more than that, a map of justice. I realized the feeling rising in my chest wasn't fear or anxiety, it was resolve. The final step was reaching out publicly, discreetly, a private message to a community newsletter, a short email to a social support circle, a gentle post in an elder advocacy forum. I described the pattern of abuse without naming anyone directly, inviting others to share their experiences, to affirm their rights, to recognize their value. By the time the sun had set, I sat in the glow of my living room lights, exhausted but unshaken. I whispered to myself, "This is only preparation, only gathering, but soon the world will see the truth, and they will understand that I am not the problem, that I am the guardian of my own life." And in that moment, I felt the first thrill of the coming confrontation, not violent, not loud, but inevitable. The first domino had been placed. The network of witnesses, evidence, and allies was ready. The public stage would not be a surprise. And most importantly, I had reclaimed my voice. Because when the confrontation came, and it would come, I would not be alone. I would be unshakable. The day had finally come. The venue was a small civic hall, neutral, bright, lined with folding chairs and tables. A projector hummed in the corner, ready to display timelines, documents, and photos. About 30 people filled the room, a mix of family members, a few neighbors, church friends, and my allies. There was an electricity in the air, the kind that crackles before a storm, sharp and undeniable. I entered calmly, carrying only my blue notebook, a few folders of evidence, and the air of someone entirely confident in their truth. Denise and my son were already there. Denise perched on the edge of a chair, nails tapping rhythmically, scanning the room like a cat, certain she was in control. My son fidgeted beside her, eyes darting, jaw tight. Carlos, my lawyer, gave me a subtle nod from across the room. I began by greeting everyone politely. "Thank you for being here," I said. My voice was calm even, carrying quietly to the back of the room. "Today, we discuss matters of fact, not opinion, and facts are documented." The projector clicked on. My timeline flashed across the wall. Birthdays, school events, holiday trips, childcare records, financial transfers. Clear, precise, unavoidable. I motioned to the first folder. "These are all transactions I managed over the past decade," I said. "Every dollar, every action, every instance of assistance." I flipped through sheets carefully, letting the audience absorb the scale. Thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours, countless sacrifices. Denise scoffed softly. "This isn't relevant," she said, trying to regain control. I didn't flinch. "It is relevant," I said, "because it establishes context. It establishes a pattern, and pattern matters." I called on Mrs. Johnson to speak first. She recounted discreetly yet powerfully, witnessing my unwavering support for my son and his household, childcare, financial aid, guidance. Each story corroborated the timeline and documents. Next, neighbors testified. They confirmed the repeated exclusion and the subtle mistreatment during family events. Each word reinforced my position, each account adding weight to the record. I paused, letting the room absorb it all. Then I pulled out the images from the wedding, the service area table, the mismatched chairs, the awkward proximity to the kitchen doors, the photograph of Denise whispering to the bridesmaid. I let the photos linger on the screen, the hum of the projector accentuating the silence in the room. Denise's expression flickered, her confidence faltering. My son shifted uncomfortably. Then I spoke directly to them. At my son's wedding, I was placed near the service area. My seating was deliberate. This was not an oversight. This was a message that my years of dedication were invisible, that respect was optional, that my voice and presence could be diminished. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone calm. But this room is witness to a different truth. That dedication, those sacrifices, those decades of care, they are visible, they are undeniable, and anyone attempting to override my authority, my decisions, or my rights will face documented accountability. Carlos chimed in, presenting legal interpretations, elder rights, boundaries, documented abuse of power. He made it clear that the attempt to impose oversight without consent was not only unethical, but potentially illegal. Denise opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. Every threat, every attempt to control, every accusation of drama has been documented. You have the opportunity to resolve this quietly, with acknowledgement and respect, or publicly, with accountability. The room remained silent except for the soft whir of the projector. My son's face had drained of color entirely. His lips trembled as he attempted to form words. You did all this?" he whispered. "Yes," I said, "and it stops now. The narrative you have been crafting for years, it ends today, not with anger, but with clarity." I gestured to the projected evidence. "Everything you believe about me being dramatic or irresponsible is contradicted by decades of action. Every omission, every oversight, every claim against me is documented, verifiable, and witnessed." Denise's fingers fidgeted with her notes. She had no strategy against the overwhelming evidence. No one could argue with facts and corroborated accounts. I continued, "This is not about humiliation. This is not about revenge. This is about boundaries, recognition, and respect. If anyone here doubts that, I invite you to review the evidence personally." A few extended family members exchanged glances. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others nodded subtly, acknowledging what had been happening in silence for years. Carlos spoke again. We are prepared to ensure that any further attempts to undermine Mrs. Coleman's authority, finances, or dignity are met with full legal accountability. The documentation is comprehensive and the witnesses are available. I took a deep breath, looking around the room. My eyes met my son's. His expression had changed. Fear, recognition, shame, and something else, understanding. "You see," I said softly yet firmly, "I am not the problem, but the problems you have created for yourselves through assumption, neglect, or manipulation are now visible, and everyone here sees it." Denise's shoulders slumped, the color fading from her carefully made-up face. My son exhaled slowly, eyes wet, realizing that his attempts to sideline me had failed, and in that quiet civic hall, with witnesses present and evidence irrefutable, I felt it. I had regained the narrative. I had reclaimed the power. I had turned humiliation into authority. The room, once charged with tension and intimidation, was now quiet, silent with acknowledgement, and I sat calm and deliberate, knowing the next moves were mine to make, on my terms. Because finally, they understood. The woman they tried to minimize was standing fully, clearly, and unshakably in control. In the days that followed the meeting, silence hung heavier than ever. Not the calm, chosen silence I had cultivated, but a hollow one, echoing through their side of the story. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't explain. And yet, the world began to shift without me lifting another finger. Word travels fast in families, especially when shame is involved. By the end of that week, the whispers had started. How Denise tried to manipulate me, how my son allowed it, how everything had been documented. My sister from Georgia called to say, "People finally see what you've been through." I didn't gloat. I didn't defend myself. I just said, "Good. Truth doesn't need noise." 2 days later, Denise called. Not from her number, a different one. Maybe she thought I wouldn't pick up otherwise. I almost didn't, but curiosity won. "Angela," she said, her tone brittle, "I think we got off on the wrong foot." Wrong foot, the same words people use when they're standing ankle-deep in consequences. "I just wanted to say," she continued, "maybe I came on too strong. We all just want peace, you know?" I didn't argue. I just said calmly, "Peace starts with honesty. You brought papers to my house to take control of my finances. That's not peace. That's theft dressed as concern." Silence on the line. I could almost hear her swallow the truth like something too sharp to digest. Then she tried again. "You made me look bad in front of everyone." "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You did that all by yourself. I just turned on the light." She hung up without saying goodbye. My son didn't call for another week. When he finally did, it was late at night. His voice was hoarse, drained. "Mom," he said, "Charlotte's parents are upset. They heard about the meeting. Things have been hard. The word he used meant uncomfortable. "I'm sorry for that," I said, "but I'm not sorry for telling the truth." He hesitated. "I just wish it hadn't gone public." I exhaled slowly. I tried to handle things privately for years. You only noticed when it reached a room full of witnesses. He didn't respond. I could hear him breathing, shallow, restless. Finally, he muttered, "Charlotte moved back with her parents for a while. Denise's job found out she was under investigation for mishandling her late brother's insurance funds. She's furious with me." Consequences, not revenge. Just the weight of truth balancing itself out. "Son," I said gently, "you don't have to fix it. You just have to face it." He sighed, long and heavy. "I don't even know where to start." I looked out my window at the quiet street, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the glass. Start by telling the truth. To yourself, to your wife, to anyone who will listen. Start by owning your choices. He whispered, "I'm sorry." And though I had waited years to hear those words, they didn't land the way I thought they would. They didn't heal everything, but they mattered. By the end of that month, Denise had moved out of her condo and into a smaller apartment. Her social circle evaporated once the investigation confirmed her history of financial assistance requests from multiple relatives, each one oddly similar to mine. She stopped calling. Charlotte returned to my son's house, but with new boundaries. No more secret accounts, no more guilt tactics, no more pretending things were fine while siphoning money from my savings. Their faces had changed the next time I saw them. Less arrogance, more fatigue. They were quieter, humbled in ways only consequences can teach. When my son spoke that day, it was softer. "We're trying to do better, Mom." I nodded. Good. Doing better doesn't mean earning forgiveness overnight. It means living differently from now on. He nodded back, eyes red. "We will." And for the first time in years, I believed him. Not because he said it, but because he didn't ask for anything after. As for me, life grew simpler, lighter. I still woke early, still made tea, still tended my plants. But the air in my home felt freer now, as if the walls themselves were relieved I'd finally stopped letting guilt rent space here. Sometimes people say justice is loud, sirens, headlines, courtroom cheers, but real justice is quiet. It happens when you no longer have to explain yourself, when the people who underestimated you finally trip over the truth you laid bare. That was my justice. No shouting, no revenge, just peace built on proof. And when I walked past the wedding photo hanging on my wall, my son and Charlotte smiling in a moment I could no longer resent, I whispered the lesson I'd learned through every bruise, every slight, every lonely evening that had shaped me. The cost of disrespect is self-destruction, and the price of dignity is silence held long enough to speak only once. They had wanted to control me. They ended up exposing themselves. And as I watched the sunlight crawl across my living room floor, I realized something else too. I didn't need to win. They had already lost when they forgot who taught them love and what respect truly costs. Sitting in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the soft glow of lamplight and the familiar weight of my blue notebooks on the shelf, I finally allowed myself to reflect on the journey. The humiliation at the wedding, the confrontation, the painstaking evidence gathering, the fallout, all of it had led to this moment. Clarity, freedom, and choice. I speak not just to my own experience, but to anyone who has ever been marginalized, ignored, or treated as a convenience. To those whose sacrifices have gone unseen, whose voices have been silenced, your value is inherent. Your life is yours to govern. I am 64. I am a mother, a mentor, a witness to decades of devotion. And I have learned, finally and completely, that love without respect is nothing. You cannot offer yourself fully to others while they diminish your presence, and you cannot expect your worth to be recognized if you do not claim it yourself. 6 months ago, I was sitting near the service area at my son's wedding, humiliated, diminished, overlooked. Today, I have a life filled with agency, with choice, with purpose. I have boundaries and allies. I have a voice that carries. And I have learned that freedom is never a gift. It is a right. So I speak to those who hear my story now. If you have been treated as invisible, as a tool, as a resource to be drained and discarded, do not remain silent. If your sacrifices have been ignored or manipulated, do not wait for acknowledgement. Document, plan, and protect yourself. If your dignity has been challenged, know that justice, sometimes quiet, sometimes public, is possible when you hold firm to your truth. And I offer a reflection for the family who wronged me. The choices you make, the disrespect you cultivate, and the manipulations you attempt will always have consequences. Not all lessons are painful in the same way. Some come quietly, some with legal and social accountability, and some, like this one, leave you humbled before the strength of the very person you underestimated. To my son, to Denise, to Charlotte. The opportunity to learn, to grow, to honor others is always there. The chance to see the value in a life lived with integrity is always present. You cannot erase history, but you can choose your path forward. I have chosen mine. And to you, watching this, ask yourself, if you were in my place, what boundaries would you set? What respect would you demand? How would you reclaim your voice? I leave you with these truths, simple but profound. You are not obligated to be anyone's convenience. Your life, your choices, and your dignity belong to you. And finally, freedom is the measure of self-respect, not the acquiescence of others. I invite you now, not just to listen, but to reflect, to examine your own life, and to consider where you may have allowed disrespect, or where you have overlooked your own value. Take the lesson. Build your boundaries. Claim your life. Because the most powerful act is not vengeance, not punishment. It is living fully, authentically, and with integrity. And in that life, you will find peace. A peace that no betrayal, no slight, no manipulation can ever take away.